Hi everyone, this is Ravi. Welcome to Katalon's automation tutorial. As you all know, I've already published 35 YouTube videos covering beginners to the advanced level concepts. This is our lesson 36. Please do subscribe to the channel, click on bell icon, you'll receive notifications whenever I publish more videos. In this lesson, I'm going to teach you about the web elements and locators. So I'm going to talk about how can you locate the web elements in generally for automated tests so that you can apply all these methods while automating the test cases by using Katalon. So as part of this lesson, I'm going to cover three different chapters. In chapter 1, I'm going to talk about the selectors and locators. As part of this chapter, first I'm going to discuss about what are the selectors and locators, and then what are the types of element locators in automation testing. And then in chapter 2, I'm going to talk about the basic attribute locators. As part of this chapter, let us first understand what are the basic attribute locators, and then how can you identify the controls or objects using this basic attribute locators method. And then we are going to talk about the chapter 3 where I'll cover the concepts of XPath. So as part of this chapter 3, first we are going to understand what is XPath, and then what are different ways to create XPath, and then how to create XPath, and then in chapter 4 I'm going to talk more about CSS selectors. So as part of this chapter, I'm going to teach you, or I'm going to explain you what are the CSS selectors and what are the different ways to create CSS selectors, and then how to create CSS selectors using different attributes. So now let us begin our session with the agenda items that we discussed. This is our chapter 1 where you will learn about selectors and locators. As part of section 1 in chapter 1, I'm going to talk about what are selectors and locators. So before we understand about selectors and locators, let us first understand about web objects and elements. Any given web application consists of the following objects and elements, that are edit box, link, image link, image button, text area, checkboxes, radio buttons, drop down lists, etc. So to identify all these objects and elements, we need selectors and locators. So now let us understand what are selectors and locators. First, what is selectors? So selectors is the string parameter passed in the locators, and selectors are strings that are used to create locators. Then what is locator? Locators are basically the HTML attributes of a web element. They help identify unique web elements on a page to perform the action on these elements. So hope now we understand what are selectors and locators and why do we need these selectors and locators to identify the web elements. This is our section 2 where you will learn about types of element locators in automation testing. So what are the different types of element locators in automation testing? So in web test automation, locator is the only way to identify an element on a web page when you're running your test scripts. So when it comes to automated testing of web applications, choosing a suitable strategy is very essential. So
Picking a suitable strategy is crucial not only to Selenium but also to Katalon Studio. Katalon Studio provides features to generate necessary locators like XPath, CSS selectors, etc. so that users only need to choose the correct locator to use. In other words, Katalon Studio has done almost 80% of the task, and the remaining 20% of the task will be decided by users. So this chapter talks about the remaining 20% of the task that needs to be performed by the users, right? Starting a project with a good strategy will make test projects stable and scalable, as well as reduces the effort at the maintenance phase. So this tutorial will help you fulfilling this expectation. So now let us first understand what are all the different types of element locators in automation testing. So the following are the basic locators like ID, href, class, text and tag. And also we have advanced locators like XPath and CSS locators or CSS selectors. So this brings us to the end of chapter 1. This is our chapter 2 where I'm going to teach you about the basic locators or the attributes. So as part of section 1 in chapter 2, let us understand what are these basic locators. So there are many different types of web elements, with most common elements including labels, text boxes, buttons, hyperlinks, checkboxes and radio buttons. But there are some other custom elements built from the basic elements like frame, dialog boxes, drop downs, calendars and forms. So to identify these elements, we can follow one of the strategies, which is simple or basic locators strategy. So what are the basic locators that are available? So the basic locators are like ID, href, class, text and tag, etc. This is our section 2 of chapter 2. As we already understand what are the basic locators, so in this section you will learn how can we identify controls, objects using basic locators. So the choice of locator depends largely on your application under test. So in this tutorial, we will use Cura Healthcare Service application provided by Katalon. So the first method to identify the objects and controls, which is locating by ID. So this is most common way of locating elements since IDs are supposed to be unique for each element. Now let us see an example how can we locate controls or objects by using ID attribute.
As I mentioned earlier, so we are going to use the Cura Healthcare Service application built by Katalon to see all our examples related to identifying the control by using different methods. So now let us first understand how can we identify the control by using an attribute called ID. For that, first let's navigate to login page. Okay, so once you navigate to login page, let's assume I want to identify a control which is username, password and login. So all these three controls I would like to identify by using ID attribute. How can we do that? So here let us first see username. You need to right click and then click on inspect. As soon as you click on inspect, this will open your developer tool console, right? So now here, if you see closely, the username text box is being defined by an ID attribute called ID equal to txt hyphen username. So let's see how can we identify the control. Okay, let's see, your page is very big and you have lot of controls. So then how can we identify the control by using an ID attribute. For that, you need to first click on Control F. That will open a search bar to find by string, selector or XPath. So now our concentration is on attribute. So for that, for any ID attribute, you need to start with the hash. Hash denotes the ID attribute. And then let's say txt hyphen user name. This is your ID attribute, right? See, as soon as I type the ID attribute, it is actually pointing you to the corresponding control on the screen. Correct? So I can see system identified only one control, unique control. Correct? So let's say I want to identify the password, txt hyphen password. See, now it is identifying the control called password on the screen, which is a unique control. Correct? Let us say I want to identify a control. If you scroll down here, let's see, right click on this login button and click on inspect. See, it is now pointing you to the login button properties, attribute properties. If you see, what is the ID attribute value? It's btn hyphen login. Let's say here, come down to search and just type btn hyphen login. See, now it is actually showing you on the screen the unique control that is identified by using ID attribute. So you can see you have only one control on the screen. Correct? So this is how you can identify the controls by using an ID attribute. Okay, so what is our next method of identifying the control? So locating by name. So locating elements by name are very similar to locating by ID, except that we use the name as prefix instead of ID. So now let us see an example. Again, let's go back to our Cura Healthcare application, right? And now navigate to login page. So if you want to inspect, let us first inspect. Let's see this text box, okay? Just right click on and inspect. If you observe closely, this opened your developer tool, and this particular text box does not have an attribute of ID. And also it does not have an attribute of name also, right? It has a class attribute, placeholder attribute, right? Value attribute, but this does not have name attribute. So that's why let's go back to username. Okay, click on inspect. If you see here, see this username has an attribute of ID, but along with ID, it also has an attribute of name. Name equal to username. Correct? So that means you can identify this username text box by using name attribute. Now let's inspect password. And this password text box also has an attribute of ID, and it also defined by an attribute of name equal to password. Right? Now let's see login button. Right click on login button and click on inspect. So if you see here, this login button has an attribute of ID, but I don't see any attribute called name. That means this login button cannot be identified by using an attribute called name. So you may end up using some other attribute like unique attribute called ID. So most of the developers define their objects or their controls with a unique attribute called ID. So hope you all understand how can we use an attribute of name by using to identify the controls. Okay, so now let's go back to our next method. Our next method is locating by linked text. So this type of locator is generally applies only to hyperlink texts. Okay, so let's go back to again Cura. Okay, here let me just go to home button, right? So now I want to inspect this make appointment. Okay, let's click on inspect make appointment. Now I want to introduce you to a new concept called CrowPath. Okay, so I have already installed a plugin called CrowPath, which is an add-on for your Chrome browser. Okay, so let me open CrowPath here. Okay, this is my CrowPath. So if you see, as soon as I open my CrowPath, right, this is my CrowPath. Let's inspect this make appointment. Okay, so when I inspect this make appointment, you can see a attribute called link text. What does this attribute? So this particular button has a linked text called make appointment. And let's inspect this one. Okay, let's inspect this info@Katalon, right click and click on inspect. So if you see this particular link, this is my link. So the link has a link text attribute. So that means you can identify this object by using link text attribute. Okay, that means this is a link, and what is the text that is displaying on for the link? Simply you enter that particular text. Okay, and let me also introduce you to something else. Okay, in CrowPath you also have an option to set a driver command. So see here, this is your attribute and this is your attribute value, correct? So now I want to set driver. So if you see here, now let's copy this and paste it in my notepad. Okay, so if you paste the notepad, see it actually giving me the entire command driver dot find element by dot link text. Okay, so basically by using link text also you can identify your controls. Okay, so let's go back to our next method. Our next method of identifying the controls is locating by tag name. So now again, let's go back to Cura Healthcare demo and let us first understand what do you mean by tag name. If you see your entire HTML DOM, see this is your HTML for this particular page, correct? If you see, this HTML has different tags. Like this is one tag called div, and this is another tag called div, and this is another tag called h2, right? So each and every control and their properties are defined in different tags, under different tags like div, span, and there is input tag, right? So now we can identify the controls by using tag name as well. Okay, so now let's go back to our home. Okay, and here let's inspect the header, this Cura Healthcare Service header. If you right click and inspect, this Cura Healthcare Service header is defined under tag called h1. If you see the CrowPath here, right side, I just showed you earlier, right? So the CrowPath has a tag name of h1. So that means now there is one text, or there is only one control that is defined under header h1, this entire page. If you see here, let's inspect we are about your health. If you see this particular text is actually defined under tag name called h3, right? And let's inspect this, and this text is defined under tag name called h4, right? So that means you can identify, if you see here, you can see here all the tag names here under strong tag name, correct? Again, inspect this, it has a tag name of h3, correct? And inspect the header, page header, it has a tag name called h1, right? So that means you can identify your controls by using different tags that are available in HTML. Hope you all understand the concepts of identifying the controls by using the basic attributes like ID, name, link text, and tag name. This brings us to the end of chapter 2, section 2. This is our chapter 3, where you will learn more about XPath. So I'm going to teach you what is XPath and how can we use XPath in our automation testing, and then how can we create XPath by using different methods in automation testing. As part of section 1 of chapter 3, first let us understand what is XPath. XPath, an XML path used for navigation through the HTML structure of the page. So it is a syntax or language for finding any element on a web page using XML path expression. And XPath can be used for both HTML and XML documents to find the location of any element on a web page using HTML DOM structure. So in automation, if the elements are not found by the general locators that we discussed in our previous section, like ID, class, name, etc., then XPath is used to find an element on the web page. So in this tutorial, we will learn about the XPath and different XPath expressions to find the complex or dynamic elements. So whose attributes changes dynamically on refresh or any operations. So what is our XPath syntax? So XPath contains the path of the element situated at the web page. So standard XPath syntax for creating an XPath is, so if you see on the screen, XPath is denoted as forward slashes, 2 forward slashes, tag name, open square braces, @ attribute equal to attribute value and close square bracket. So if you see here, what does this forward slashes, 2 forward slashes denotes? It denotes, it basically represents select current node. And then tag name represents the tag name like input, div, image, whatever. So basically the tag name of your HTML DOM. And then @ means select an attribute. And then what is your attribute name? And then you are going to specify what is the value of the attribute. So this is the structure of your XPath. So this brings us to the end of our section 1 of chapter 3. This is our section 2 of chapter 3. So in this section, you learn what are different ways to create XPath. So let us first understand what is XPath. So as I discussed earlier, to find the element on web pages accurately, there are different types of locators that we already know, right? So XPath can be defined, or XPath can be created by using all these different locators. If you see on the screen, XPath locators are ID, class name, link text, XPath, and CSS path. So basically these are all the different locators that we can use in creating the XPath. There are two types of XPaths. So one is absolute XPath. So it is the direct way to find the element, but The disadvantage of the absolute XPath is that if there are any changes made in the path of the element, then that XPath gets failed. So what is the key character of this absolute XPath? That is, it begins with a single forward slash. So whenever XPath begins with the single forward slash, that means it's absolute XPath. So which means you can select the element from the root of the node. So basically, absolute XPath is defined from the root of the node. If see an example here, in a square, a red color square box, right? So the XPath is starting from HTML slash body slash div slash section. So basically, you are starting from the root of your HTML. So basically, you're starting from the root of node. Okay. And then what is our next type of XPath? Second type is relative XPath, which starts from the middle of HTML DOM structure. So it starts with double forward slashes. So it can search elements anywhere on the web page, means no need to write a long XPath as same as absolute XPath. So you can start from middle of HTML DOM structure. Whereas absolute XPath, you have to start from the root of the node. But this one, you can start from the middle of HTML DOM structure. So relative XPath is always preferred as it is not a complete path from root element. So if you see an example in the square box, see your relative XPath starts with double forward slashes, right? So now in this course, we are going to talk more about relative XPath, which is very important. So this brings us to end of section 2 in chapter 3. This is section 3 of chapter 3. So you will learn how to create XPath by using different methods and by using different locators. Okay, so as I told you earlier, so XPath syntax is forward slash, forward double slash, tag name, open square brackets, at the rate, attribute equal to the attribute value and closed square brackets. So let us see our first method of creating XPath, which is basic XPath. XPath expression select nodes or list of nodes on the basis of attributes like ID, name, class name, etc. So from the XML document as illustrated below. So if you see the expression here, it starts with double forward slashes, and here tag name I'm using input and open square brackets at the rate name. So this is one attribute, or we can use at the rate ID, right? Equal to, you're going to write the value of your attribute name. What is the name attribute value, right? So now let us see an example. How can we create the basic XPath? So let's again navigate to login. And here we want to inspect login button, for example. Okay, so which will open your developers tool. And here you need to click on, or you need to enter the key Control F. Okay, so this will give you opportunity to create your own XPaths. So what is XPath expression? Which is forward double slash, right? So forward double slash, what is the tag name that you want to use? Okay, so let's say I want to use a tag name called, so what is the tag name for this button? Which is button. The tag is button here. Okay, so let us type button. Okay, and then open square brackets earlier as I told you, and you need to start at the rate, which means you are gonna define your attribute here. What attribute I want to use? Let's say I want to use an attribute called type, right? So this is one attribute. type is one attribute, ID is one attribute, class is one attribute, right? For this login button. So I want to use type an attribute, okay, equal to what is the value of your attribute. So I'm gonna put a single quote and you need to specify the value of your attribute. So type attribute is submit. Just double click and copy this value and you can paste here. And then you need to close your square brackets. See, now you can identify one control called login, right? So you understand, right? So this is our first method. Okay. So now let us see some more examples creating a basic XPath by using simple attributes. I want to see one more example. Let's say I want to see an attribute of this one. Let's assume right click and inspect. So here, what is your tag? My tag name is input. So I'm going to replace this with input, and then I want to use a type called text here. Okay, let's see text. So if you see here, you can see there are three objects that are matching, three controls that are matching, because this, let's see what are all the objects. Okay, your first object is this one. So this also, this edit box is actually having a tag name called input and your attribute type is equal text. So let's see what is our next control. So even this has the same tag name, same type as text, right? And this one, 3. So there are 3 different controls that matches this XPath. And let us see one more example. Now I want to use ID attribute. Here instead of type, let's specify as ID. And what is the ID value? So ID value is text hyphen username. So let us simply copy this text hyphen username and then paste it here. So now you see you have a unique object here. So you can see this XPath matching with only one control, which is your username. Correct? And now I want to identify with a value attribute. Okay, let's see this one. Inspect this. If you see, this particular text box has a value attribute. You can see value. So now here, instead of ID, I want to specify value. And what is the value attribute here? It has a John Doe, right? I want to replace this. So if you see, this XPath is identifying one unique control, this one, right? And now I want to show another example by using an attribute called class. So how can you identify an object with the class attribute? Okay, let's say I want to replace this with class and I want to specify the class name as btn hyphen default, and see now what it shows you. Oh, sorry, here instead of input my tag name should be button. So if you see, my login button has a tag name of button. See, this is your tag name, right? And my class is btn or space btn hyphen default. Correct? So now you're able to identify the login button uniquely by using this XPath. Correct? And let us understand another XPath now. So I want to see href as an attribute. Let's go here. Let's go to home and see your title, sorry, make an appointment. I want to inspect this. So if you see, this has a href value. Now I want to form control find. I want to form an XPath. Okay. This button is defined under a tag called A. Correct? So A, open square brackets, @href is my attribute. Correct? Equal to, what is the attribute value? This is my attribute value. So let me take the attribute value here, copy attribute value and paste it here under single quotes, correct? And then close square brackets. Now you see the XPath that we built by using href attribute now is returning only one control, which is your make appointment button. Okay, so these are all the different examples where you can create XPath by using simple attributes like ID, name, class name, etc. So let us see another method. Okay, what is the next method? So I want to use another method called contains. So I want to create XPath by using method called contains. So let us see an example now. So contains XPath. So contains is a method used in XPath expression. So it is used when the value of any attribute changes dynamically. So for example, login information. So the contain feature has an ability to find the element with partial text. So we are not going to match exact text. We are going to just basically match the partial text so that if any portion of your text is dynamic, it can easily handle. Okay. So now what is syntax? So forward slashes and of course tag name. But here we are specifying star means so any tag name. So it can start with any tag. Okay. Or you can specify any specific tag also. Okay. Open square brackets contains and then your open brackets at the rate name of your attribute and then value of your attribute. Okay. So now let us see examples. Let's again go back to our login page. So I want to write an XPath for username. So username is defined under the tag. Let's see here. What is your tag starts with, let's say input, but I want to specify star. That means any tag. It can take any tag. Okay. I'll say contains at the rate ID. I want to use an attribute of ID and it has the value starts with the attribute value starts with txt-u. That's it. I'm not specifying the full text here. If you see here, my ID attribute is txt-username, but I'm not using entire ID attribute here. What I'm using? I'm using the partial text. Okay, let's see another example. The same example, John Doe. Okay, here earlier we specified John Doe fully, right? Here I want to take another attribute called value, and value I want to just specify as John instead of John Doe. See, now it is identifying one control, this one. This is the control it is returning, correct? In the same way, I want to identify class. Let's say button. Let's inspect this. So it has a class of this. So I want to just say at the rate class and I want to specify partial text btn hyphen default, right? So now I'll just specify simply btn hyphen div. That's it. So now it is returning this login button, right? So this is how you can use contains method. Okay. So now let's go back to our presentation. So what is our next method? Our next method is using or and operators. So how can we create XPath? By using or and operators. Okay. So now let's see, in our expression, you'll be defining two conditions. So basically you are going to use the two conditions, whether first condition or second condition should be true. So it is also applicable if any one condition is true or maybe both. So means any one condition should be true to find any element on the web page. Okay, so in the below XPath expression, it identifies the element which satisfy single or both conditions are true. So what is the syntax? Same, forward double slashes, your tag name, open brackets, right? Square brackets, at the rate, your attribute name equal to attribute value. So that is your first attribute here, or your second attribute equal to second attribute value. So let us see an example. Okay, let's go back to our application again. So here I want to say username. I want to this one. Let us see this one. Okay, let's start with this forward double slash. As we all know, I can use probably star. So basically any tag name I want to take, and then open square brackets, right? So this username is actually, it's a type of text, right? As you know, it's a type, which is your first attribute. I want to use the first attribute as type, or I want to identify element which has attribute name attribute equal to, what is my name attribute value? Username, right? And then you can close your square braces. If you see here, see, it is able to identify three different edit boxes, because see, if you see here, my first one is this has type attribute which has a text value, and also it has name. So basically name attribute as username, correct? So that's why it is identifying. Let's go to next one. So in the same way, second one, in the same way, third one. Okay, so now because I used or, so all three of them is meeting one of the criteria. Now let's say I want to use and. If I remove or and specify and, see, now it identifying only one control, because it should meet both the conditions. Okay, so hope you all understand. Now let us go to our next method. Our next method is, how can we create XPath by using text function? So the XPath text function is a built-in function of your Selenium WebDriver. So which is used to locate elements based on text of a web element. So it helps to find the exact text elements, and it locates the elements within the set of your text nodes. So the elements to be located should be in the string form. So basically the syntax is forward double slashes and your tag name, open square brackets, and then you need to write text and then parenthesis, right? Equal to what is the text that you are looking out for. Okay, so now let's see example. Okay, quickly let us see example. If you see, this is one make appointment button, correct? Now I want to identify this by using text. So what is the text? My text is make appointment, simple. Okay, so simply you can write A is your tag, right? And then you need to specify square brackets text, okay, parenthesis, right, equal to, what is my text? I'm looking out for make appointment text. So you need not to worry about any attributes here, okay, and then close brackets. See, it is simply identifying the control by using text attribute that is displaying on web page. And for example, I want to see an attribute of login. So what is your text? Which is login, right? But the tag is button. Your tag will be button. And what is the text? Simply login. Log in. That's it. So it is able to identify one control. It is returning one control, right? So this is how you can create XPath by using text function. So now let us go to how can we create XPath by using access method. So these XPath access methods are used to find the complex or dynamic elements. Below, we will see some of these methods. Okay. So now within access methods, following like ancestor you can use, child you can use, or parent you can use. So these are all the different methods. Okay. So for illustrating these XPaths, again, we are going to use the same Cura Healthcare Services application. Okay. So what is the syntax? So you need to, again, your double forward slashes, tag name, and you need to define your attribute equal to attribute value. But here again, we are gonna do double forward slash. So first we will be looking at following by using following syntax, right? How can you write your XPath? Okay, double slash following and your colons twice, and you need to specify your tag name here. Okay, so let me show you an example. I want to see all the text boxes. Okay, let's first write double forward slashes. Okay, and same way, any tag, any input tag. Okay, open square braces at the rate type attribute equal to text, right? So all the edit boxes has a type attribute of text. Okay, close your brackets. And now double slash. I want all the edit boxes following the input tag. Input tag. If you see here, it is actually returning me 3 different edit boxes. Okay, so what if I want to have a unique identification? I want to identify only one edit box out of these 3. Simply, you can use your index. Open square brackets 3. Now you see it is actually giving me only one output, only one control. So this is how you can create XPath by using following access method. Now let us see ancestor method. How can you create by using ancestor method? So let's go back here again. So if you see here, let's go to home. Okay, let's go to home. Now I want to see a text of my header. Okay, this one. Here, what I'll do, I'll just write down text function. Okay, and then what is the text? My text is this one. Simply copy this from the screen. This is my text under single quotes, right? And now I want to close the brackets, right? Here I want to use ancestor. Ancestor and your tag, which is div. Okay, this is returning me 4 controls. 1, 2, 3, 4. But now I want to basically bring only one control. How can I specify that? I can simply specify again the number. So now which is bringing me only one control now. See, it is returning 1, which is this one. This way we can use ancestor access method. Now what is our next access method? Let us see child access method. These are all your access methods. Okay, so this method selects all children elements of the current node as shown below. Okay, so what is our syntax? Forward double slashes, your node or tag name, open square brackets, your attribute name equal to attribute value, and again close your square brackets. Now you need to again provide double forward slashes. Here you want to specify child. Earlier we specified ancestor following, right? Here you need to specify the child and what is the tag name that you are looking out for. Okay, let us see one example. I want to log in here. Click on login. So now I want to identify all the radio buttons under that if you inspect this, right? So these all radio buttons are defined under a class, say 1, 2, 3. So all these 3 radio buttons are defined under a class called call sm4, right? I want to use this now. Okay, so now let's go here, control find. I want to define this as, here I want to take the class. What is the class? Let's copy this class value, and now let us remove all this and specify at the rate, okay, at the rate class, and this is my class name, close square brackets. Now see, this is the class, but I want to identify all the childs that under this class. So for that, I'm going to specify / child colons twice. Now label. If you see, these childs are under tag name called label. So now if you see, it is returning all 3 controls, right? See here, your Medicaid, none radio button, Medicare radio button. So now let us see what is our next method. Our next method is parent method. So earlier we covered child method, now it is parent method. So parent method selects the parent of the current node as shown in the below screen. Okay, so again syntax is same, only the difference is instead of using child we are using parent. Okay, let's see an example. Okay, so now let us go to our, let's log out here, let us go to login button. Okay, let's go to login, and here I want to write down, let's write our syntax. Here any node I want to use my text function, square text equal to, what is the text? My text is login, simple login. Okay, and here close the square brackets, right? Now I want to identify the text of login, okay, what with the parent of my node is div. So now if you see, there are 2 controls that we are able to identify. That means I want controls with text called login, but it should have a parent of div. So if you see, it has a text of login with a parent of div tag, and the next one also has a login text, okay, but with a parent of div. This brings us to the end of section 3 for our chapter 3. This is our chapter 4, where you will learn more about CSS selectors. As part of section 1 in chapter 4, let us first understand what are CSS selectors. The CSS selectors are one of the locator strategies offered to identify the web elements. The CSS selectors mainly use the character sequence pattern, so which identifies the web element based on their HTML structure. So locating an element using CSS selector may seem a little difficult than using attributes like ID, name, link, etc. that we discussed in chapter 2. But it's one of the most efficient strategies to locate dynamic elements that don't have consistent HTML attributes. So why do we need a CSS selector? So locating an element on web page can be a challenging, especially in the current scenarios where every web page is dynamically programmed and renders the web elements on a need basis. So it makes finding a unique static attribute for a dynamic element quite tricky, right? So finding a unique attribute for dynamic element is tricky. So as most of the time, these elements don't have consistent attribute values. Hence, directly using locators like ID, name, link, partial link, etc. will not be possible solution. So that is where CSS selectors comes into picture. So as CSS is powerful enough to identify most of the web element present on the web page, right? So that's the reason the CSS selector is a best method to identify the dynamical or dynamic attributes. Okay, so it can also identify elements that don't have consistent attribute values. So it becomes the first choice for all the automation testers, developers. In section 2, as part of chapter 4, you will learn what are different ways to create CSS selectors. So CSS selectors can be created based on the following strategies. What are those strategies? The first strategy is using ID attribute, and the next strategy is using class attribute. And CSS selectors can be created by using different attribute values. And also it can be created by using substring, and there is another method called combining attributes. That means you can create CSS selectors by combining the attributes. Okay, and what is the format of CSS selector? So if you see on the screen, node, open square brackets, and then you are going to give attribute name equal to your attribute value and closed square brackets. So where node is nothing but the tag name of the HTML element which needs to locate, and attribute name is the name of attribute which can locate the element, and attribute value is the value of attribute which can locate the element. In section 3, as part of chapter 4, you will learn how to create CSS selectors using different methods or attributes. So our first method is using ID attribute. So we can use the ID in CSS selector to identify and locate a web element. So what is the syntax? It's you're going to specify the tag name and then hash. Hash denotes your ID, and then you're going to provide the ID attribute. Okay, so now let us see an example. Okay, how can we create CSS selectors by using ID attribute? Okay, for that let's go to Cura Healthcare application. Okay, so now let's say this is I want to create CSS selector for make appointment. Okay, right click. As usual, we're going to inspect the element, and here let's enter Control F. So I need to define ID, right? I want to take ID as an attribute. Okay, so here you need to first start with the tag name. What is the tag? This button is under tag called A, right? Directly you'll start with A. So not like XPath. XPath start with double forward slashes, but here it start with the tag name and open square brackets. And what is the attribute? ID equal to, what is the ID? I want to use the ID. My ID is btn hyphen make hyphen appointment, right? And close brackets. That's it. So if you see, this is actually CSS locator which is returning only one control, CSS selector, and which is make appointment. Or you can also write this in different format. So instead of using ID, right, I can simply use hash. As I told you in earlier sections also, you can simply write hash. See, your node or tag name, hash your ID attribute, right? So it is also returning me only one control, which is make appointment. Okay, so now let's go back to slide. What is our second method? Our second method is using class attribute. Okay, so let us see one example. So the class attribute of the HTML tags can also identify the elements on the web page. So let's go back to our Cura application, healthcare application. Now let us understand how can we use class attribute. Okay, so let's go to login page, right? And I want to see what is the class that is used. Okay, so the class is form controls. I want to basically define a CSS selector by using class form control. Okay, control find here. What is the tag name first? I want to use input. Okay, input. I want to use input. Open square braces. Okay, class. What is the class? I need to put the class attribute value here, right? So now if you see, by using this class, I'm able to identify all the controls that has a class form control. See, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4. So there are 4 different objects or controls with this CSS selector. This can also, you can basically, class is denoted by dot. Okay, ID is denoted by hash. So I can simply delete this entire thing and put dot. Okay, and I can delete all this. See, now even this is identifying and returning 4 different controls. See, so I'm able to identify the controls by using class attribute CSS selector, right? So now let us go back to our slide. What is our next method? Next method is using other attributes. So other than class and your ID attributes, we can use any other attributes. Okay, apart from ID and class attributes, all other attributes present within the HTML tag of the element can also be used to locate web elements using CSS selectors. Okay, let's go back here. Now I want to use another attribute called placeholder. I want to use the placeholder attribute for this username. Okay, so here what I'm going to do, again this starts with your input, correct? Input, right? And open square brackets, right? Here I want to use placeholder. See, you can see this is the placeholder attribute, class attribute, type attribute. Now I'm using placeholder attribute. Placeholder, okay, equal to username, close. So if you see here, I want to again placeholder, I'm using placeholder as username, capital U actually here. Okay, oh sorry, the spelling mistake, placeholder username. See, now this particular CSS selector is returning me two. One is this one, the other one is this one and this one, both. You have both, right? So it returning two attributes. Now I want to use name attribute. Instead of place, you have a name attribute also defined, right? If you see here, this is my name. So I want to use name attribute, but it's a small u, right? Now I can see only one unique control is returning. Let's go back to slide again. Now what is our next method? Our next method is combining ID and other attributes. So let us see first how can we. So let's see one thing. Okay, I want to define, again I'm starting with input. Okay, I want to identify the edit boxes. Okay, input, I want to use the class name here. Okay, let's go here, class here. I want to combine class with placeholder, for example. Okay, what is the class? This is my class. Class can be denoted by your dot. Okay, that's why I'm using simple shortcut. Okay, and now I want to use placeholder. So your second attribute can be can be defined under open square brackets. Okay, equal to placeholder is capital US username. See, now it is returning two controls. One is username and the other one is next username. Correct? Right? I can use these two. Or if I use this value attribute, right, it can directly give me one John Doe. So if you see here, I'm using edit box that has the class name as form control and the value attribute. This is my value attribute, right? Value John Doe. So it is giving me only one control directly, this one. So which one it is giving me? It this one. Okay. So now let us go to our next method. Our next method is using parent-child hierarchy. So provides the capability to locate an element in the HTML DOM using its relativity with other HTML elements. Okay, so if one element is direct parent or child of another element, then you can use parent-child hierarchy. Okay, so let us see one example here. Okay, I want to go back to my Cura healthcare application and I want to inspect this. So if you see here, my password is under input tag. And what is the parent? Parent of this is your div tag. Password is defined under input tag, whereas div is its parent, right? Now I can define what is my, let's do one thing. Div is the parent and child is what? So less than symbol you have to use. Child is input, parent div, child is input, and name, I want to use the name attribute here. Simply password. That's it. So it is returning 1. So now let's go back here. What is our next method? Our next method is using starting text. I want to, again, let's say I want to use this one. Okay, how can I use the partial text? Okay, simply input. Okay, and now I want to use ID as an attribute, and I want to specify, instead of here txt user name. So this is a normal method, right, where we provided entire text, but I want to use very partial text here, partial attribute value. Let's say I want to use partial. What we need to do, we need to append caret after ID. We need to append the caret after ID. This one, this is the caret. See, as soon as I append the caret, it is again able to identify the control. If I remove this, see, it is returning 0. It is not matching. Append the caret. Now it is returning 1 control. This brings us to the end of chapter 4. As part of section 4.4, we are going to compare XPath versus CSS selector performance. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of XPath, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of CSS selector? So let us see now. So XPath is bidirectional. You can traverse elements from parent to child or child to parent. Whereas CSS selector is unidirectional. You can only traverse from parent to child. And XPath is slower in terms of speed and performance. Whereas CSS selector is comparatively faster. And XPath allows the construction of text-based selectors that we already covered. CSS selector does not allow to construct the text-based selectors. And XPath should start with single / or double / followed by a tag name or wildcards like star. Whereas CSS allows to directly direct some of the attribute based selectors such as hash for ID and dot for classes. XPath provides accesses to solve complicated selector problems, whereas CSS does not have any access methods. XPath is less readable as it grows, whereas CSS selectors are more readable. This brings us to the end of our chapter 4. Thank you.